I took a job driving a night cab to escape the ghosts of my past. I didn't realize my new passengers would be ghosts themselves, with destinations like haunted ruins and the gates of the local cemetery. Now I follow a set of deadly protocols on roads that have teeth, working for a boss who never blinks. I thought this was a job, but I'm quickly learning it's a sentence, and my soul is the final fare. The ghosts of my own making have been chasing me for a year, but it was the ghost of next month's rent that finally cornered me. It's what led me to a classified ad tucked away in the back of a free city paper, one that felt less like a job offer and more like a dare. Charon Cabs, it read. Night drivers wanted, discreet transport, no questions asked, excellent pay. Desperation is a key that unlocks doors you should have left bolted. The office was a sterile, anonymous box in a warehouse district where hope went to rust. The man behind the desk didn't seem to have an office, just a single steel chair and a stark metal table. He introduced himself as Mr. Charon. The name pricked at some dusty corner of my memory. A lesson from a mythology class I'd slept through. But my empty stomach was screaming louder than any academic echo. Mr. Charon himself was an exercise in unnatural stillness. His skin was the color of old parchment, stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. He sat perfectly upright, his hands folded on the table, and in the 10 minutes I was there, I never saw him blink. Not once. His eyes were like chips of obsidian, reflecting the room's single buzzing fluorescent light without a flicker of warmth. "The work is simple, Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice a dry, flat monotone that seemed to absorb the sound in the room. "You follow the assigned route. You pick up the fare. You drop them at their destination. You do not deviate." He slid a set of keys and a laminated card across the table. When his fingers brushed mine, a shocking, marble-like cold shot up my arm, a cold that felt ancient and deep. I flinched. He didn't react. "The roads hunger after dark," he added, his gaze unwavering. "Stick to the path." That was it. No paperwork, no W-2s, no questions about the haunted look in my eyes or the tremor in my hands that had cost me my last real job. Just the keys to car number 3 and a cryptic warning. Walking out to the car, I felt a shadow detach itself from the wall of the warehouse. It was a man, older than me, with a face like a worn-out road map and eyes that had seen too many miles in the dark. "New guy?" he grunted, his voice a gravelly rasp. He nodded at the keys in my hand. "Elias Thorne." Silas Blackwood. He lit a cigarette, the flare of the match briefly illuminating the deep lines etched around his mouth. "Let me give you the real orientation." He pulled up the sleeve of his worn denim jacket, revealing a pale, puckered scar on his forearm. It was a perfect crescent, the unmistakable shape of a bite mark, but far too wide for any human jaw. "This," he said, his voice dropping low, "is what happens when you get curious. The roads have teeth, Elias, remember that." He took a long drag from his cigarette, the ember glowing like a malevolent eye in the twilight. "And read the damn protocols. They're not suggestions." He limped away without another word, disappearing back into the gloom, leaving me with the cold keys and an even colder feeling in my gut. Car number 3 was an old Crown Victoria, the kind cops and cabbies used to drive until they were beaten to death. This one felt like it had been. The moment I opened the door, the smell hit me, a foul trinity of ozone, like the air after a lightning strike, the sweet, cloying scent of decay, and the faint, coppery tang of old blood. I tried to dismiss it. Old car, probably had a few rough fares, but the smell clung to the air, thick and oppressive. The interior was worn black leather, cracked and split in a dozen places. I slid behind the wheel and put the key in the ignition. The engine turned over with a low, grudging rumble. The dashboard flickered to life, and the built-in GPS screen lit up, glowing with a pale, sickly green light. For a moment, the usual static on the screen resolved itself. It was just for a split second, a blink-and-you-miss-it nightmare, but I saw it. A face, pale and gaunt, mouth stretched open in a silent, pixelated scream before dissolving back into random noise. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was seeing things. Stress. Lack of sleep. I picked up the laminated card Mr. Charon had given me. Charon Cabs. Protocols for night roads. It read. I thought of Silas's scar and forced myself to read. Most were simple. Protocol 1. Never speak unless spoken to. Protocol 2. The fare is always exact. Never ask for more. But then they got strange and terrifying. Protocol 4. At the intersection of 6th and Ohio, do not stop. Do not slow down. Do not look at them. They will look like they need help. They don't. They need a vessel. Protocol 6. If you are assigned the woman in yellow, do not speak to her. Do not look at her in the rearview mirror. Her fare is a piece of you she will take with her. This had to be some kind of sick joke, a hazing ritual for the new driver. It had to be. But the memory of Charon's dead eyes and Silas's monstrous scar argued otherwise. As the GPS chimed, a single destination appearing on the screen in that same ghostly green, I gripped the steering wheel. The leather felt slick and cold beneath my fingers. This wasn't a job, it was a sentence. But I was broken, desperate, and already haunted. What was one more ghost? I put the car in drive, and the price was my soul. I was already signing the damn receipt. The address on the glowing green screen solidified, and a voice slithered from the car's speakers. It wasn't synthesized or human, but something horribly in between. A dry, rattling whisper, like the sound of dirt sliding down a coffin lid. Pick up at 417 Rosewood Lane. Destination, Cypress Hills Cemetery. So there it was, no ambiguity. I was a hearse driver for the Spectral. I swallowed hard, the knot of fear in my stomach tightening. Rosewood Lane was one of the city's older, moneyed streets, lined with stately Victorian homes that watched the world from behind veils of weeping willow and wrought iron fences. Number 417 was immaculate, a dollhouse of gingerbread trim and manicured gardens, but as I pulled to the curb, a chill that had nothing to do with the night air seeped into the cab. It was a deep, penetrating cold that clung to the vinyl seats and seemed to suck the warmth right out of my bones. The front door of the house opened, and a woman stepped into the amber glow of the porch light. She was slight and elderly, wrapped in a thick wool shawl despite the mild autumn evening. She moved with a slow, careful grace, one hand clutching a small, antique-looking handbag. As she opened the back door, the cab was flooded with an overwhelmingly sweet scent. It was the smell of funeral lilies, so thick and cloying it was almost suffocating, underscored by a heavier, loamy perfume of damp, freshly turned earth. "Thank you for coming so quickly, young man," she said, her voice a gentle, papery thin thing. "I'm Beatrice Morrow. I'm afraid I'm terribly late." She settled into the back seat. I mumbled a reply, my eyes fixed on the road ahead, remembering Protocol 1, never speak unless spoken to. "It's my husband, you see," she continued, her voice filled with a quiet, genuine sorrow. "He never did like to be kept waiting." The GPS whispered a route, and I followed it obediently. The city lights blurred into streaks of color, but inside the cab, the world felt muted and cold. Beatrice was a calming presence, her gentle chatter a stark contrast to the palpable dread she'd brought with her. She spoke of her William, of their 50 years together, of the garden he loved, and the way he used to read to her by the fire. It was a sweet, mundane monologue of a life well lived and a love dearly missed. I almost let my guard down. Then it happened. "He always said my roses were the most beautiful in the county," she was saying, her tone wistful, "but I think he just said that to flatter me." The word fractured. For a single, horrifying instant, her soft, grandmotherly voice dropped into a guttural, inhuman register, a scraping sound like a tombstone being dragged across pavement. The air vibrated with it. I flinched, my knuckles turning white on the steering wheel. I risked a glance in the rearview mirror. Beatrice was sitting perfectly still, a serene, sad smile on her face, as if nothing had happened. Had I imagined it? The stress, the bizarre rules, The oppressive atmosphere of the cab. It had to be getting to me. I was cracking. "Are you all right, dear?" she asked, her voice once again frail and sweet. "You look pale." "Fine," I choked out. "Just tired." I forced my gaze back to the road, my heart thudding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. We drove in silence for another few minutes, the scent of lilies and grave dirt growing stronger with every block. I couldn't resist one more glance in the mirror. Just a quick one, to prove to myself I was losing my mind. What I saw will be burned into my memory until the day I become a fair myself. For a sliver of a second, under the flickering streetlights, her face was not her own. Her jaw was unhinged, detached from her skull and hanging low on her chest. Her mouth was a silent, gaping hole, a black, bottomless void that promised nothing but annihilation. It was an image of pure, physical impossibility. I slammed my eyes shut for a heartbeat and snapped them open again. She was back. Beatrice Morrow, the sweet old woman, patting her handbag and looking out the window, a single tear tracing a path down her wrinkled cheek. I didn't look back again. When we reached the towering gates of Cypress Hills Cemetery, the GPS voice whispered its final dusty command. "You have reached your destination." The unnatural cold in the cab seemed to coalesce, becoming almost painfully intense. "Thank you, young man," Beatrice said. She opened the door and stepped out, not onto the asphalt, but into the cemetery grounds, passing through the locked iron gate as if it were smoke. She turned back to face me, and the last vestiges of her human disguise fell away. The soft, kind face melted like wax, the skin pulling back from the bone to reveal a hollow-eyed skull. Her jaw, now fleshless, was fixed in a wide, triumphant rictus grin. There was no mirth in it, only the empty, eternal grin of death itself. She gave a slight mocking nod, and then her form dissolved, crumbling into a swirling mist of dust and sorrow that was quickly swallowed by the cemetery's shadows. I sat there, frozen, hands locked on the wheel, the engine rumbling in the profound silence. My breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. My first fare. On the back seat, where the impossible horror had just been sitting, lay 3 old, tarnished coins and a single, perfect white lily, already starting to wilt. This wasn't a hallucination. This was the job. And the night was still young. The scent of Beatrice Morrow's lily faded slowly, but the chill she left behind clung to me like a shroud. I sat for a long time, the tarnished coins cold in my palm, my own reflection a ghostly stranger in the darkened windshield. The GPS screen remained blank, offering a silent, green-tinged reprieve. I almost hoped the night was over, that my one fare was the initiation and I could now flee back to my threadbare apartment. Then the back door opened. I didn't hear a footstep, a hand on the handle, or the click of the latch. It simply swung open, and a man was suddenly there, half spilling into the back seat. He was translucent, his form wavering like a heat haze off summer asphalt, and through his chest I could see the cracked upholstery of the seat. He was dressed in the simple work clothes of a handyman, his face a mask of frantic desperation. "Please," he begged, his voice a frantic whisper that seemed to come from all around me. "I'm not on the list. I don't have a fare. But you have to take me, please." My blood ran cold. This was wrong. This wasn't a pickup. The rules, the protocols Mr. Charon had laid out with such finality spun through my head. Follow the assigned route. Do not deviate. This was a deviation of the highest order. "I can't," I said, my voice tight. "That's not how this works." "They're trapped," he pleaded, his form flickering violently. "Because of me. I can't move on until they can. Just to the old Ashworth place, end of Sycamore Creek Lane. I'll show you." He pointed a shimmering, insubstantial hand. "My name is Abner Finch. I made a promise I couldn't keep." The Ashworth place. The name landed in my gut like a punch. I knew it. Knew the story. Knew the smell. It was the site of a fire 2 years back. A bad one. A call I had been on. Back when I wore a different uniform. Back when I still believed I could save people. my greatest failure. Against every screaming instinct for self-preservation, I heard myself say, "Get in!" The drive to Sycamore Creek Lane was short and silent. Abner huddled in the back, a shimmering knot of misery. As I turned onto the dead-end road, the temperature plunged. The cheerful chirping of crickets abruptly ceased, as if a switch had been thrown, plunging the world into a profound, unnatural silence. The air grew heavy, pressing in on the car. And then the smell hit me, not smoke. It was the smell of what comes after, old, wet ash. A scent of finality and decay that coated the back of my throat. The Ashworth house wasn't a house anymore. It was a skeleton, a jagged charcoal drawing against the night sky. The roof was gone, leaving the blackened ribs of its support beams exposed to the stars. I pulled to a stop in front of the ruin, the headlamps cutting a swath through the darkness, illuminating a scene of utter desolation. "It was my fault," Abner whispered from the back seat. His voice was no longer frantic but heavy with a guilt so ancient it felt like it had its own gravity. "The wiring. I told Mr. Ashworth it was fine for another year. I cut a corner to save him a few dollars. I was trying to be a friend." As he spoke, a new scent began to fill the cab, sharp and acrid. Smoke. Not the memory of it, but the real, choking thing. My eyes started to water. Faintly from outside the car, I heard a sound that I knew all too well, the low, hungry crackle of flames catching on dry wood. "I heard the sirens," Abner continued, his voice cracking. "I lived just down the road. I ran here, but it was too late. The whole house, it was a furnace." The sound of fire grew louder, closer. I could feel a wave of heat wash over the car, so intense it felt like the windows should be melting. I gripped the steering wheel, my paramedic training screaming at me to run, to call for backup, to do something. But I was frozen, trapped in this phantom echo. Then they appeared. In the skeletal doorway and the empty frames of the windows, figures began to form. They weren't ghosts like Abner or skulls like Beatrice. They were man-shaped silhouettes, cobbled together from shadow and smoldering soot. They flickered like dying embers in a hearth, their forms unstable, shifting. Where their eyes should have been were 2 points of orange, hateful light, burning with an accusation that transcended worlds. A man, a woman, and 2 small children. The Ashworths, they didn't move. They just stood there, wreathed in the phantom heat, and one by one they raised their charred, indistinct arms and pointed. At Abner. At me. A terrible, keening sound tore itself from Abner's throat. It wasn't a word. It was the sound of a soul being ripped apart by regret. He threw himself against the back of my seat, his ghostly form passing halfway through it. "I'm sorry," he screamed, and the sound was no longer a whisper but a physical force that shook the cab. It was a guttural, agonized roar of pure anguish, a confession offered to the abyss. "I'm so sorry." In response to his cry, a collective shudder ran through the 4 smoldering figures. The hateful orange light in their eyes softened, dimmed, and then went out. The oppressive heat vanished instantly. The crackling of flames ceased. And then, as if a spell had been broken, the Ashworths crumbled, their forms collapsing into 4 silent piles of gray ash that the wind caught and scattered into the night. The silence that returned was absolute. The choking smell of smoke was gone, leaving only the cold, damp scent of the ruins. In the back seat, Abner Finch's form was fading rapidly, his desperation replaced by a weary peace. "Thank you," he breathed, the sound as faint as a dying man's last sigh, and then he was gone. I was alone, staring at a dead house on a dead street, a witness to an absolution I hadn't known was possible. I had broken the rules. And in the oppressive quiet of the night roads, I had a terrifying feeling that there would be a price to pay for it. After dropping off the ghost of Abner Finch, I expected some kind of cosmic reprimand, a monstrous new fare, a threatening whisper from the GPS, maybe even a visit from the unnervingly still Mr. Charon. Instead, I got silence. For nearly an hour, the cab sat idling in the darkness, the only sound my own ragged breathing and the low grumble of the engine. The silence was a unique form of torture, a coiled spring of anticipation. I had broken their rules, stepped outside the lines, and the waiting was my punishment. Finally, the screen flickered to life. The whispery voice returned, but this time the destination it gave was for a downtown hospital, a living fare. The sheer normality of it was, in its own way, terrifying. My passenger was a Dr. Eris Reed, an emergency room physician just getting off a grueling shift. She slumped into the back seat with a weary sigh. Her crisp scrubs rumpled, the scent of antiseptic soap clinging to her. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were wide and hyper-alert, as if she'd seen something she couldn't unsee. "Just to the corner of Ash and 12th, please," she said, her voice steady but strained. We drove in silence for a few blocks, the city lights painting fleeting patterns across her tired face. I kept my eyes forward, content to be a simple, anonymous driver for a few precious minutes. "You see a lot of strange things driving at this hour?" she asked suddenly. The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. "Some," I answered carefully, not wanting to reveal the true nature of my cargo. She nodded, staring out the window. I thought I was hallucinating. Sleep deprivation, stress. You know, we had a code blue tonight. A young man, car accident. We worked on him for 45 minutes, but we lost him." Her voice wavered for the first time. About 10 minutes later, I saw him. I felt a cold prickle on my neck. "You saw him, standing at the end of the hall, outside the morgue. It looked like him, but it was wrong." She shuddered, pulling her arms around herself. The proportions were off. His fingers were too long, stretching almost to his knees. And he didn't have a shadow. The hallway lights are bright, everything has a shadow. But he was just a void in the space he occupied. He turned to look at me, and he smiled, but his mouth opened too wide. I screamed. A nurse came running, and when I looked back, he was gone. She fell silent. Her story, a cold stone dropped into the quiet of the cab. She had seen a glitch in reality, a peek behind the curtain at whatever cheap, poorly made imitations haunted the edges of our world. She had seen something that wasn't just a ghost, but a poorly rendered copy. I dropped her off at her corner, and she left her payment on the seat without another word. The encounter left me more rattled than my time at the Ashworth ruins. Abner was a tragedy. This was a perversion. The GPS chimed again almost immediately. "Proceed south on 5th Avenue." It wasn't a destination, just a directive. I obeyed, my hands tight on the wheel. The route took me toward the old financial district, a canyon of darkened buildings that felt like a vast, empty mausoleum. That's when I saw the note on the sun visor, a small addendum to the protocols I'd missed. Protocol 3, the 4th floor of the First Sovereign Bank does not exist. Do not acknowledge what you see there. I glanced up. The bank was a grand, imposing structure of stone and glass, 3 stories of dark windows staring out at the street. But above them, where there should have been only cornice and sky, was a 4th floor. It wasn't built of the same materials. It was a shimmering, indistinct addition, like a projection layered poorly over reality. And it wasn't empty. Dark figures pressed against the windows from the inside. They weren't people. They were shapes of pure blackness, things made of solidified night. As I watched, horrified, their forms began to distort. They smeared against the glass, their limbs elongating, their bodies dripping downwards like warm tar, pooling at the bottom of the window frames before being reabsorbed into the shifting mass. They were formless, trapped and aware of my passing. My foot pressed harder on the accelerator. The GPS chose that moment to issue a new command. Turn right onto Elm Street. Elm Street, the woman in yellow. Protocol 6. Her fare is a piece of you she will take with her. My blood turned to ice. At the far end of the deserted street, under a single flickering streetlight, a figure stood. A woman in a pale yellow dress. Even from a distance, there was something deeply wrong about her stillness. She was a statue in a world of motion. I remembered Silas's warning. Read the damn protocols. The rule for her was clear. Do not look at her in the rearview mirror. My eyes were glued to the road ahead, my focus absolute. I drove past her, the car feeling like it was moving through deep water. As I passed, I heard it. A series of sharp, wet cracks, one after the other, like knuckles breaking in sequence. Against my will, my eyes darted to the side view mirror. She was still standing in the same spot, but her body was facing away from me. Her head, however, had swiveled a full 180 degrees on her neck to track my car. Her spine had made that sickening sound. Her face was a smooth, featureless mask of skin, devoid of eyes, nose, or any expression. It was a blank canvas of flesh. And then as I watched, a mouth opened. It wasn't a normal mouth. It was a vertical slash of absolute black that split her face from her chin to her hairline, opening impossibly wide into a canyon of emptiness. It gaped in a silent, all-consuming scream that I couldn't hear but felt in the deepest recesses of my soul. I wrenched my eyes away, a raw cry tearing from my own throat. I floored it, leaving the silent scream and the impossible woman behind. The protocols weren't company policy. They were commandments for survival in a world that was actively glitching apart at the seams. And I was driving right through the corrupted code. My nerves were raw, frayed wires sparking in the dark. The image of the woman in yellow's screaming, featureless face was seared onto the inside of my eyelids. Every shadow seemed to twist into her impossible shape. I drove numbly, my knuckles aching from their grip on the steering wheel, waiting for the next directive from the whispering void in my dashboard. It came, as I knew it would, a soft chime, a flicker of green light. A new destination appeared, but it wasn't an address. It was an intersection. 6th and Ohio. Protocol 4 slammed into the forefront of my mind, a klaxon of warning. Do not stop. Do not slow down. Do not look at them. They will look like they need help. They don't. They need a vessel. My heart, which had just begun to settle into a survivable rhythm, kicked into a frantic, panicked sprint. The GPS reiterated the command with its dry, dusty whisper. Proceed through the intersection. Maintain velocity. Do not deviate. I was already driving toward it. The landscape began to change, the buildings growing more derelict, the streetlights becoming sparse and sickly. The pavement here was a patchwork of old repairs, a road map of urban scar tissue. Potholes gaped like open sores. An oppressive weight settled over the cab, a palpable pressure that made the air feel thick and hard to breathe. I was entering a dead zone, a place where the veil between worlds was not just thin but shredded. Then I saw them. At first, it was just a flicker of movement in the gloom ahead, but as I drew closer, the horror took shape. They were crawling out of the very ground, pushing their way through cracks in the asphalt. A hand with fingers bent at agonizingly wrong angles clawed at the pavement. A figure, thin and distorted, peeled itself away from the brick wall of a derelict laundromat, leaving a damp, human-shaped stain behind. This was their nexus, the place where they had all been torn from their lives. The Horde. Their forms were a catalog of violent physics. One man was hunched and compressed, as if he'd been crushed into a fraction of his normal height. A woman's limbs were splayed in directions nature never intended, her head lolling on a neck that was clearly broken. They weren't walking. They were lurching, scuttling, dragging themselves forward with a dreadful unified purpose. As my headlights swept over them, 100 pairs of hollow eyes turned to fix on me. I pressed my foot down, the engine groaning in protest. Do not slow down, I muttered to myself, a desperate mantra. They swarmed. They surged into the street, a wave of broken bodies and insatiable need. The first one hit the side of the car with a wet, percussive slap. The sound of a heavy sack of laundry dropped from a great height. I flinched, fighting the instinct to swerve. Then another hit the hood. Then the windshield. Greasy, translucent handprints began to appear on the glass wherever they touched, sizzling and smoking as if the ectoplasm was eating into the surface. The smell of ozone and decay from my first moments in the cab returned with a vengeance. Now mixed with the foul stench of burned hair and spoiled meat, the radio crackled to life, spewing static. But through the noise, a voice came through, my own. It was my own internal monologue, my deepest fears given voice and broadcast back at me. God, they're gonna get in, the radio whispered, my own panicked thought echoing in the small space. The glass is going to break. Underneath my stolen thoughts, a new layer of sound emerged, a cacophony of their final moments. The squeal of tires, the crunch of collapsing frames, and the sickening sharp crack of breaking bones. It was a symphony of impact playing on a loop, trying to drag me into their shared eternal trauma. I screamed, a primal sound of pure terror, and that's when I lost control. The steering wheel, slick with my sweat, bucked in my hands. It felt like a living thing, a panicked animal trying to wrench itself free. It pulled hard to the right, toward a mass of figures clawing at the passenger door. They wanted me to join them. The road itself was hungry. I looked at the GPS screen for a way out, for any guidance at all. It showed a live feed of the cab's interior, a fisheye view of me fighting the wheel. But the face staring back from the screen wasn't mine. It was a skeletal visage, fleshless and gaunt, its jaw hanging open in a silent, endless scream. It was showing me my future if I failed. No, I roared, putting all my weight and will into turning the wheel, fighting the unseen force that was trying to claim me. I was wrestling with the car, with the road, with the collective hunger of the dead. For a terrifying second, the tires scraped toward the curb. I could see a woman's face pressed to the window, her features flattened, her eyes black pits. Then, with a final, desperate wrench, the wheel submitted. The car shot forward, straight through the heart of the horde. I plowed through their intangible forms, each passage sending a fresh wave of icy cold through the cab. And then I was through. The sounds abruptly cut off, the pressure vanished. In my rearview mirror, the intersection of 6th and Ohio was just a dark, empty street once more. I drove another 2 blocks before my body gave out. I slammed on the brakes, threw the car in park, and collapsed over the steering wheel, gasping for air, my body shaking with violent, uncontrollable tremors. After a moment I looked up. The windshield was still covered in their handprints, ghostly white shapes, permanently sizzled into the glass. They were marks of passage. Proof that I had survived the crossroads, but a grim reminder that its hunger was patient, and that I was still on its roads. The shaking in my hands eventually subsided, but a deeper tremor had taken root in my soul. I sat parked in the oppressive silence, staring at the ghostly handprints sizzled onto my windshield. They were trophies from my battle at the crossroads, stark white reminders of the teeth hidden in the dark. I felt hollowed out, a vessel that had been filled to the brim with terror and then violently emptied. The chime from the GPS was soft, almost apologetic, but it still made me jump. A new pickup order glowed on the screen. The Nightingale Funeral Home. Destination, Cypress Hills Cemetery. A grim smile touched my lips. Of course. After a horde of the violently dead, it was time for a more formal, officially processed departure. The job had a morbid sense of order. The funeral home was a stately brick building, its windows softly lit from within, casting a serene glow that felt like a lie. A man stood waiting on the steps under the portico, as if he'd been expecting me. He was older, dressed in an impeccably tailored dark suit, holding a heavy leather briefcase in one hand. He looked solid, distinguished, and utterly exhausted. He opened the back door and slid in with a quiet sigh. The air in the cab instantly changed. The lingering miasma of the crossroads was replaced by a sterile chemical scent, the faint, cloying sweetness of preservative fluids, and the dry, papery smell of decay. It was the scent of a body, trying its best to hold itself together. "Alistair Graves," he said, his voice a low, cultured rumble that seemed to drain the energy from the air around it. He clutched the briefcase in his lap with both hands, his knuckles white. As he adjusted his grip, I saw a slight bulge ripple under the surface of the worn leather, as if something inside had shifted. "Elias," I replied, my voice hoarse. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, heading back toward the now familiar gates of Cypress Hills. My passenger was silent for most of the ride, his gaze fixed on the passing city lights. His stillness was different from Mr. Charon's. It wasn't predatory, but immensely heavy, weighted down by a lifetime of regret. I found myself glancing at him in the rearview mirror, watching the briefcase in his lap. It sat there, a block of dark leather, yet I could have sworn I saw it faintly pulse, like a slow, weak heartbeat. "A promise must be kept," Alistair said suddenly, his voice startling me in the quiet. He didn't look at me, but at the briefcase, especially the last one. "It's the only thing with any weight at the end." I didn't respond. I was just the driver, the ferryman. The weight of his soul, or his briefcase, was not my concern. I just had to get him to the shore. When we arrived at the cemetery gates, Alistair didn't pass through them like Beatrice had. He got out of the car, walked to the immense barred entrance, and simply stood there, waiting. He had a task to complete before he could enter. He set the briefcase down on the pavement, his posture straightening as if a great burden had been lifted. I was supposed to leave, but I felt compelled to wait. I cut the engine, plunging the world into a silence broken only by the hum of the city far behind us. I flicked on the radio, needing a human voice, some music, anything to chase away the profound loneliness of the place. Static hissed from the speakers, then cleared. But it wasn't music or a talk show, it was a sound. A slow, rhythmic shuck thump. It was the unmistakable sound of a shovel biting into damp soil, followed by the soft sigh of earth being tossed aside. It was close. It sounded like it was happening right outside my window. I killed the radio, but the sound didn't stop. Shuck thump. It was clearer now, a methodical digging in the darkness just beyond my sight. A grave was being prepared. For him, right now. Alistair, seemingly at peace, turned back toward the cab. He offered me a small, weary smile, and then he began to come apart. It didn't happen all at once. It started at his feet. His polished dress shoes seemed to lose their definition, the sharp leather turning gray and dry. A fine powder began to trickle from them, and the crumbling traveled up his legs. His tailored suit, his clasped hands, his tired face. They all dissolved, not into mist, but into a cascade of fine gray dust. In seconds, the man who was Alistair Graves was gone, leaving only a small, shifting pile of ash on the pavement, which a sudden breeze caught and scattered among the dead leaves. The heavy briefcase collapsed at the same moment, its leather dissolving into the same gray powder. Where it had stood, lying amongst the dust, was the fare, 3 aged coins, and a single withered, dead lily. So that's what he had been carrying, a final, fragile promise. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty space where he had stood. The rhythmic digging had stopped. His final resting place was ready. In the back seat, a fine coating of gray dust had settled over everything, a silent testament to my passenger. This was the end of the road for him. For me, it was just another stop on a night that refused to end. The sun was still a distant rumor, but the deepest, most oppressive part of the night was beginning to recede. A faint, bruised purple bled into the eastern sky, promising a dawn I wasn't sure I'd live to see. After Alistair Graves crumbled into memory, I had received no new fares. I'd driven aimlessly for a while. The silence in the cab, a heavy blanket, the gray dust on the back seat, a stark reminder of my last passenger. Maybe this was it. Maybe my shift was over. Hope is a dangerous thing on the night roads. The cab's radio crackled to life, but it wasn't the GPS or the sound of digging graves. It was the dispatch. A voice, clear and professional, cut through the static. "Car number 3. We have a priority pickup for you. Personal request." My stomach tightened. A personal request? That wasn't part of the system I was beginning to understand. Then a new voice came on, and the air was punched from my lungs. Elias, Elias, it's Lena. I made a mistake. Please come get me. Lena. The world tilted on its axis. It couldn't be. My Lena. My ex-wife. The woman whose face I still saw in my dreams. The woman whose departure had been the first domino in the collapse of my life. It was her voice. Not just the sound of it, but the specific cadence, the slight, vulnerable tremble she got when she was admitting she was wrong. It was a perfect imitation, a flawless forgery of my deepest, most painful memories. My hands clenched on the wheel. It was a trick. It had to be. A test. Please, Eli, the voice on the radio pleaded, using the old nickname that no one else had ever used. It was a key, designed to unlock the most rusted, broken parts of my heart. I'm so sorry. For everything. I'm at the old place. I shouldn't have come here, but I didn't know where else to go. Please come. The old place. Our first apartment. The one with the leaky faucet I was always promising to fix, and the window that looked out over the park where we used to walk. The one I couldn't bear to drive past anymore. The GPS screen flared to life, displaying the address, a glowing green beacon of temptation. Every fiber of my being screamed to go, to floor it, to race to her, to see if this was some impossible, miraculous second chance. My loneliness and regret were a gaping wound, and this voice was a phantom hand, offering to stitch it closed. For a moment, I let myself believe. I could see her standing on the curb, her familiar coat wrapped around her, her face filled with the same love I thought I'd lost forever. The illusion was so powerful, so seductive, it was almost physically painful to resist. I remembered Silas Blackwood's scarred arm. This is what happens when you get curious. I remembered the protocols, thumbing through the laminated card with a shaking hand until I found the one I had only skimmed before, thinking it would never apply. Protocol 7. The night roads know you. They will use your past as a lure. They will speak with the voices of your dead and the voices of your lost. These calls are not for you. They are a trap for your soul. Do not answer. Do not acknowledge. Do not go. The voice on the radio grew more insistent, more desperate. Elias, I'm scared. It's so dark here. I need you. Don't you love me anymore? Love her? My love for her was the ghost that had haunted me long before I started driving for Charon Cabs. It was the reason I was here, broken and desperate enough to take a job like this in the first place. And this thing, this malevolent mimic, was wearing her voice like a costume and dancing on the grave of my marriage. A hot, unfamiliar rage surged through me, burning away the cold fear. It was a clean, righteous anger. They had taken my past, my most private pain, and twisted it into a weapon. With a deliberate, steady hand, I reached forward and switched off the radio. The cab was plunged into blessed silence. I put the car in drive and turned the wheel, not toward the phantom address of my old life, but away from it, toward the distant, graying promise of dawn. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, every speaker in the car blasted to life at maximum volume, a shriek of pure, unadulterated fury that vibrated through my bones. The voice, no longer Lena's, was a monstrous, chittering shriek, a sound of scraping claws and splintering insect husks. "Worm!" It screeched, the sound so violent it made the windows rattle in their frames. "You will turn back! You will come to U.S.!" I kept driving, my eyes locked on the road ahead. "We will unmake you, Elias Thorne. We will peel the memories from your skull and wear your skin on the night roads. She will be ours to use again and again." The threats were visceral, profane, but they had lost their power over me. The seduction had failed, and all that was left was a raw, impotent tantrum. I had followed the protocol, I had denied the lure. And in doing so, I had passed the final, most personal test of the night. The screaming finally cut out, leaving a ringing in my ears and the chilling certainty that I had just made a very powerful and very personal new enemy. The mimic's shriek faded, leaving a ringing silence that was somehow worse. I drove through the gray, pre-dawn streets, the city slowly stirring to life, oblivious to the horrors the night held. I felt like a diver surfacing from a crushing depth, my body aching with the pressure of what I had endured. I had survived. I had faced their crossroads, their glitches, their most personal temptations, and I was still here. A flicker of triumph, weak but warm, sparked within me. I had won. When I pulled back into the warehouse lot, the sun was casting long, skeletal shadows. Car number 3 looked even more decrepit in the morning light, its black paint dull, the sizzled handprints on the windshield like ghostly scars. Silas Blackwood was there, leaning against the corrugated wall of the warehouse, nursing a steaming cup of coffee. He watched me get out of the car, his expression unreadable. He looked even older in the daylight, a roadmap of exhaustion etched into his face. "You made it," he grunted. It wasn't a question or a congratulations, just a flat observation. "I followed the rules," I said, my voice hoarse, even when they used her voice. A flicker of something, pity, maybe recognition, passed through his tired eyes. He took a slow sip of his coffee. "They always do. Find the cracks in you. The roads chose you, Elias. They got a taste of your desperation, your grief. They don't let go." "It's just a job, Silas," I said, the words sounding hollow even to my own ears. He gave a short, bitter laugh. "We all tell ourselves that at first. But this isn't a job you can quit. You don't work for Charon, you work for the roads." He gestured with his cup toward the office door. "Go on. Give the ferryman his due." The office was as cold and sterile as I remembered. Mr. Charon sat in his single chair, as still and pale as a figure in a wax museum. He hadn't moved. I wasn't sure he was capable of it. I approached the desk and placed the tarnished coins from Beatrice and the crumpled bills from Dr. Reed on its surface. My hand trembled as I did. Mr. Charon didn't count them. He simply extended his hand and swept them into a drawer with a dry rasp. He looked at me, his unblinking eyes seeming to see right through me, to the fear and exhaustion coiling in my gut. "The night roads have been fed," he stated, his voice the same flat monotone, devoid of all inflection. "They are pleased with your service." He paused, and the silence stretched, thick and heavy. "See you tonight?" It was a command, a statement of fact. The flicker of triumph I'd felt died completely, smothered by the cold finality in his tone. This wasn't an offer of my next shift. It was the pronouncement of a sentence. I walked out of the office in a daze, past Silas, who just gave me a slow, grim nod. I didn't get in my own car. I found myself standing by car number 3 one last time, my hand hovering over the driver's side door. I saw my reflection in the dark, filthy glass, a pale, haunted man staring back, and then I saw it. For a split second, a single, terrifying heartbeat, my eyes and the reflection changed. They lost their color, their humanity, and flared with the same pale, ghostly green light as the GPS screen. It was the luminescence of decay, of static, of the things that crawled between worlds. I was being overwritten. I was becoming part of the machine. I recoiled from the window as if I'd been burned, stumbling backward, my heart hammering against my ribs. I fled. I drove home in a panic, the rising sun feeling like an accusation. My apartment, my sanctuary, felt wrong. The air was cold. I locked the door behind me, leaning against it, my breath coming in ragged gasps, and that's when I saw it. On the small table by the door where I always drop my keys sat a small, folded piece of paper. It was brittle, yellowed with age, like something pressed in a book for a century. I never saw anyone. I live alone. My landlord doesn't have a key. It was impossible. With a dreadful sense of inevitability, I picked it up. The handwriting was an elegant, spidery script, written in faded ink. The words were simple. They were from my first fare, A welcome from beyond the grave. It read, "Welcome to the ferry. We are the toll." I sank to the floor, the note clutched in my hand. The truth settled over me, cold and absolute. I wasn't just driving the dead. I was joining them. This wasn't a job. It was an indenture. My fare wasn't money. It was me. Piece by piece, night by night, until nothing was left but a ghost behind a wheel, forever claimed by the hunger of the night roads.